Hello. My name is Glory Edom, the founder of Well Read Black Girl, and we are here for Big Ideas Night. We're excited to get started with Blair Imani and Jamia Wilson. Um, I'm going to start by reading their bios to you. Blair is a critically acclaimed historian, advocate, and activist. She's the author of 2 historical books, Modern Her Story, Stories of Women and Non-Binary People Rewriting History, and Making Our Way Home, The Great Migration and the Black American Dream. She centers women and girls in the global Black community and LGBTQ community. She's also the co-host of America Did What, an educational podcast at Anti-Racism Initiative, and she's also appeared on numerous media outlets, including Fox News, MSNBC, and she's presented at colleges and universities all over the world. Jamia is a feminist activist. Hi, Blair, how are you? Jamia Wilson is a feminist activist, reader, and speaker. She's also the director of Feminist Press at the City University of New York and the former VP of programs at the Women's Media Center. Jamia has been a leading voice on women's rights issues for over a decade. Her work has appeared in numerous outlets, including the New York Times, The Today Show, CNN, and Rookie Magazine. She's also the author of Young, Gifted, and Black, as well as Step Into Your Power, 23 Lessons on How to Live Your Best Life. Welcome, Jamia.
Hi, thanks for having me. I'm so thrilled to be with you both.
Yes, this is great. This feels like a group chat come to life. We have so much to talk about. Yes. In terms of Black activism and what we can do as authors and people who have really huge platforms. I guess the first question I have for you guys today is, let's begin with just your identities. Can you guys both express and explain what your intersectional identities are? Who would like to start? Blair?
Sure, I'll go first. So for myself, I always say in order of appearance, I'm Black, queer, Muslim. I'm Black, born Black, etc. Queer because I came out first when I was 8, and then again when I was 15. Muslim, converted to Islam in 2015. I'm a woman, cisgender woman, use she, her pronouns, and I'm an American.
What about you, Jamia?
I am Jamia Wilson, and my identities are I'm a Black woman, cis woman, a Black feminist identity. I am Southern, so I live in New York, and I've lived abroad in Saudi Arabia and Italy, but I self-identify as Southern. I feel that having those roots informs my perspective, as well as disabled, and having been born monocular and blind in one of my eyes, that has given me an ability to see in various other different ways. And I'm also an American, but I grew up in Saudi Arabia, so I very much have an expat identity as well.
I love that. I think it's so important for us to start there in terms of our identities, because that really informs all our activism in a lot of ways. And there's so much happening in the world right now between the protests with Black Lives Matter and the pandemic. We are all really hypersensitive to what's happening. And I just want to start with how both of you are feeling with everything going on in the world. What is the feeling that you have as authors, but also as individuals?
I think for myself, I was waiting for the pandemic to be over. Like, I was just thinking to myself, I had planned to do a book signing with Feminista Jones in Philadelphia, and I was looking so forward to it. It was going to be the beginning of March, and then we canceled it, right? Because we didn't want to put people at risk. And then we were talking, and I was looking at our old text, and it was like, oh yeah, we'll be able to do this in May. And it's something I can laugh at now, but it's like so sad that like we were so optimistic about like the term that this thing would be. So I really like cocooned myself. Now my parents, you've met my parents, Glory, like they are very much like, okay, when are you writing the next great American novel, you know? So I've resolved that I am not in a headspace to write. I think I am getting there. But I was waiting for it to be over. So I like cocooned, started playing Animal Crossing hardcore. Now I'm in a space where I feel really productive, starting the podcast, really feeling like my work is being affirmed. Oh, hold on. Did I disappear? Okay.
You're back.
Really feeling like my work is being, thank you. So feeling like my work is being affirmed and feeling like I've been saying the right thing for a long time, but now people are finally listening, especially this past month with the new heightened awareness around racial injustice. I've been told that I'm intelligent literally in the past month more than I have been in my life by like such different range of people. So that feels good, feels late, but that's kind of how I'm feeling, kind of like on the precipice of really exciting stuff, while a little bit angsty that people are late to the program, you know?
Right. How about you, Jamia?
So, I live in Manhattan, and it's really interesting because I live in New York City and have associate you two both so much with my life in New York, but have also been excited to see where your journeys have taken you to the sun. And it's been a really interesting experience in terms of the decision that we've made to stay in Manhattan during this time when various neighbors on just the floor I live on have not been here for multiple months. So it's been interesting to see people leave and come back. Some people move to entire different cities since March and are just daily lives drastically changed by watching how this pandemic has impacted everyone around us. And we have quite a high number of COVID-19 cases in the area of New York that I live in, a lot of essential workers and responders who live in this area. So it's just been a really, really interesting experience to kind of see how a community responds to this kind of collective experience, but also see how the intersections impact communities who are left in the margins so much more. And just knowing about just the mourning that my community has been doing in addition to the mourning and grieving we're doing as a result of state sanctioned violence, and all of that culminating in our lives while also trying to make a living and carrying all of the things we're carrying and trying to care for our families and our loved ones and all of that. So for me, it's been a profound period of going inward and examining my values, examining what my purpose, examining like existential questions about my beliefs about life and death and why I'm here and why we're here. And also a place of great hope and inspiration about what's possible. And I've really truly seen through this pandemic, and then also the pandemic of COVID, and then the pandemic of racism that we've been aware of through our experience. But also knowing that this has been one ever since, colonization and exploitation and all of those things happened. But having this really surreal experience of that Cassandra myth being brought to life, where Cassandra had been given the gift of prophecy, but being cursed with not being believed. And now it's very profound to see people who I've had to argue with about Black Lives Mattering, which just it still angers me to think about it. People I've had to argue with about the continued existence of racialized violence, the continued existence of institutional racism, posting images of themselves marching and saying Black Lives Matter, and then kind of having to process that for myself about, what does that mean that now most people of conscience can't turn away? And what does it say for those who continue to? So this is a moment that I'm learning a lot about humankind and what's possible, but one that I'm also very much stretching myself to be more brave, to be more courageous, and really thinking about the future, thinking about how do I want the next generation to know what it is that I tried to do while I was here, and just thinking about our ancestors in that context too.
You've said so much about where we are right now, this idea of stretching yourself and trying to be more open, more brave, and also acknowledging that you have been doing the work. Both you and Blair have been doing the work from the beginning. And so there's so many new people who are making lists, whether they're reading lists or marching for the first time, or trying to figure out how to enter the space of activism, whether they're donating to a mutual aid fund or a bail fund, or just trying to put themselves out there. And I've also been getting a lot of questions online about how can I be a better activist? How can I be a better community organizer? And it can be overwhelming because it feels like everything is coming at once. What would you say to someone who's entering the space of activism and they want to be a good ally or accomplice? They want to support initiatives, but how do they do it without overstepping and do it in a way that is thoughtful and also takes into consideration the history of past liberation movements?
So I've been getting this question relentlessly, and my first thing is be humble and then pick a lane. But let me just like kind of, I think, illustrate for the audience what it's been like. I don't know about you, but kind of like, I don't know what day of the week it was, but it was sometime the beginning of June when there was this like groundswell of people realizing, oh snap, racism is real and Black lives do matter, you know, and it's just about like putting that into action. And then my page literally exploded. So, you know, all the work I've been doing has culminated in me having like 50,000 followers and some change. Now I have almost 200,000 followers just in this short period of time. It really has ballooned and exploded. And I can promise people that I read every single DM, but I can't respond anymore. But people were like just asking me such basic questions, and I'm just like, can you please pause and reflect? On people to do is to be so many just a variety of messages. One person who was like, hey, president, about how Black Lives Matter and why we think Black Lives Matter. And I was like, great, go ahead. And then the person was like, I think the NAACP should do this. And I was like, okay, they're doing a lot already. And you should tell the NAACP they should do this. And I was like, honey, the NAACP has been around since 1909. They are doing stuff. Well, you know, how about you ask them what you should be doing? I think that's a lot of what's happening. I call it kind of Columbusing, where people are like, oh, I've just discovered this, I'm going to help them fix it. But they're not thinking about their expertise, what they're putting into their own mindset. So, for example, something really small and tangible. A lot of folks who have been following me are like mommy bloggers, and they blog about their family almost exclusively. They might highlight, you know, a different brand here and there, but they're not posting about Black people because they don't have Black folks in their family. That makes sense. You know, there's been really cringe discussions about people adopting just to diversify their families, which is great, but like not just for reprehensible. What I do recommend is, okay, well, maybe you post about a diaper brand. Maybe you post about the honey you put in your tea. Seek out Black brands and uplift Black brands that way, but not just one time. Be a long-term customer and really integrate that into the work that you do. Oh, you're talking about, there's a conversation about how should I talk to my children about race? Maybe do a video of you doing that conversation to inspire other people. Really put it into your context, because you can't reinvent the wheel or decide, all right, now that I've learned about this, in the next week I'm going to become an expert on white supremacy and race and educate everybody. Maybe you uplift Layla Saad, maybe you uplift folks who have been doing this work, instead of trying to put yourself in those shoes, and in doing so, edging out people who have been doing that work for long term.
Yeah. What do you think, Jamia?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with everything that you said. And, you know, I think it's so important when you are looking to start out to do your homework and see where you can be a helper to existing local movements that are already happening. A lot of times, you know, the habits and practices of white supremacy teach us to say, oh, we've got to be the one who's first, and we've got to build it, and we've got to be the one to tell everybody what to do and be on top of leading it. But leadership is also being able to follow, and it's also being able to surrender to the next generation and understand that you can play a role to lift up as you climb. And so I believe that doing the homework, which goes so well with what Blair was saying about the humility and being in and staying in the lane, right? Do the homework and think about how you can contribute to the seeds that have been planted. And if there's a twist you can make that has to do with your privilege, your particular sphere of influence, your resources you have that can help bring something new, that's great. But it's also important to contribute in terms of the greater good. I think perhaps my perspective of growing up outside of this country, but also, you know, I think it comes deeply as rooted in different African relationships around like different African cultures, having more communal visions of how we engage. I'm thinking about, you know, South Africa and the idea of Ubuntu. I am because we are. I am because you are because we are. That we don't have a culture in this country that is about the the greater good for the community. And that's why there are people who are reopening so quickly. The rugged individualist narrative, the exceptionalist narrative, all of that still kind of puts us in that place where we still, even if we're in activist movements, need to be the forefront of it, need to be, the emblematic founder of it, et cetera. And so I want us to think too about what we can take from other cultures to unlearn and dismantle that, and to say, what does it mean to be like New Zealand, where everyone shut it all down for the greater good of the whole, to make sure that elders weren't sick, to make sure that everyone had what they need, and to make those sacrifices. And so that's something I'm thinking about as well, in terms of the activism we need, right? Versus sort of the performative wokeness that we're seeing so rampantly right now, to say, what is it that I can do for the greater good right now? What are some ways I can help lift up based on where I have power? And in many ways, that doesn't have to do with what makes me and my ego look the best. It has, in most ways, it's about how do we uplift the whole. And the last thing I want to say about it is I had a really beautiful conversation with Sister Joan Chittister, who's this amazing Benedictine nun, last week. One of the best conversations of my life. I learned so much. And she said, the conversation we're having right now is for the next generation. Long after Jamia Wilson is gone, long after Sister Joan Chittister is gone, that the work we're doing now is for them. It's not actually for us. And I was really moved by that, because I think that there are people who did the work for us on this call right now, who I'm very grateful for, that they had to trust that the long arc of justice was going to come our way, that we three could be in this place right now doing this work, right? It's just really profound to think about.
I love that
And
metaphor.
I want to just
oh, go ahead.
Can I speak to Jamia's point really quick? So speaking about like it not being about your own ego, this rugged individualism, this past week on my Patreon, we had like this anti-racism course, and we talked about colorism. And I was like, and speaking of colorism, you shouldn't be listening just to light-skinned Black women about colorism. And if, America Did What is hosted by a white woman and myself, a light-skinned Black woman. And I said, if you're just listening to white women and light-skinned Black women about race and anti-racism, you're not doing enough. So if that means you need to unsubscribe from our page and go support someone else who is doing this work and budget yourself that way, absolutely do it. And it was I'm really proud that I'm in a space where I'm able to reflect that deeply. But truly, it's going to take people being like, okay, well, maybe I'm not the one to speak on this, even though I've been doing it, because I'm not the one who needs highlighting right now. And it's going to take that level of self-reflection and decentering of the self. It's also good for the soul. It is the right thing to do. And there is a settling, this is me being very woo-woo, which I am, but I feel like there's a settling of the soul that takes place when you do something that is the right step. Because once you do that, it becomes harder and harder to do something wrong, because the next time you have an opportunity to take something or not participate, you just can't, because it's weighing on your heart in that way. So I think that's what people are doing. And so really be brave, take that further step. And even if, you have to question why you're hesitant, that's a reflection step that's important too.
I think you both are just giving us so much knowledge right now in terms of what we can do to be, again, better activists, more involved, more engaged. And as you said, Blair, just protect our souls in the process. There's so much happening right now, especially in regards of politics, right? So people are calling for folks to defund the police, and there's policies being changed, and people are challenging on social media, on the streets. It's just like protests, everything is happening so quickly. And I think I would want to ask you both, when it comes to the idea of defunding the police, that's not going to happen overnight. And what can we do in the meantime to allow people to know other ways of community engagement or other ways of policing that actually respect the idea that Black Lives Matter? Because there is such I feel like it's so vocal. Everyone's talking about it right now. There's a movement happening, and we're right on almost like the tip of change. And every time I hear someone say Black Lives Matter, my heart just swells because I know it's not just us anymore. It's not just like the people it's not the original founders that are saying this. It's not just Black people. There are other people that are coming in and supporting the cause. And I think that's so crucial to the movement. But again, like everything's not going to happen overnight. So how do we allow people to know this is sustainable and it can continue? We don't have to do everything quickly and not get burnt out. Because that's another thing I've been seeing online. Everyone's like, oh, I'm burnt out. It's like, you've been protesting 2 weeks. That's not burnout. You know, we've been doing it 400 years. Like, how can we really get people to understand that this is a lifelong commitment?
Ooh, that is a word. I mean, the lifelong commitment, you know, I think one of the reasons that I do this work is I value this as being essential to life, that like this is life-giving, life-affirming work, that part of what you do in order to express gratitude for this life we have is to give back to the planet and help uplift others to understand that if one of us is not free, none of us are free. And I think that it's really important to root ourselves in that. And that is how we get to the idea of understanding that this is not a moment in time. This is a lifelong endeavor. I think about Coretta Scott King a lot because I heard her speak when I was in college and was very moved by her, and also had this feeling of being really upset that the great work that she did as an activist in herself and her stead was not focused on as much as her great husband, who is amazing, who we've all written about and talked about, but that she in herself was a trailblazer and doesn't kind of get the credit that she deserves. And she was speaking about how struggle must be fought and won in every generation, that it's something that is ongoing, that we are here to do our part now, but that a part of the cycle of life is that we're constantly learning and growing and learning and growing and unlearning and growing. And I really took that to heart in the work that I'm doing. And then when my mother was transitioning in the end of her life, she said to me in one of our last sort of long conversations, something similar, which was, I want you to know that I know that you're learning, which I thought, oh, and I was, yes, you know, you see it, even though I haven't always shown through my actions that I'm learning. I know that you're learning. And I want you to know that I did the best that I could in my generation, but it's up to your generation to do their part in the next generation, the next generation. I think that's what this is all about. And so from a spiritual sense, I also really agree with that. And then from a political sense, to understand that one of the chain reactions to progress is backlash. And we've seen it with major movements in this country, every major gain, right? No one's ever given power. We always have to take it, you know. No one's ever going to hand you justice. And if they do, you've got to really question. You got to really question if that's faux or true, right?
Right.
So I also think historically, as a point of political practice, it's also something that's very important to think about, is like, how are we like sustaining and doubling down on and expanding that progress that we've got and growing it? We can't just say, I mean, can count on one hand how many people told me that they thought that after Barack Obama was elected, that suddenly Black folks were liberated in this country from all of the systemic and institutional challenges we had. I remember my eye doctor kind of said that to me once when he was, and I remember just being like, oh, I don't even know how to deal with this. But it was one of the few times I've ever been speechless. But it was such an interesting thing because I thought, wow, people really don't get that now, especially now that Barack Obama has hit this milestone. We got to be on hyper vigilant alert. And we saw that was exactly what was needed, that the gerrymandering that happened and all of that backlash was what needed to happen. When the ERA was ramping up and it seemed like the feminist movement was going to get it ratified, then the hardlining conservative forces of that time pulled it right on back. And so I think it's something that we always have to do. And like, you know, when people talk about staying woke, right, there's actual like strategy in that. It's not just, you know, a term that we can throw around and be cute. I think of it as, oh, like I'm thinking now about like 4 election cycles away from this point, like on the chessboard. How are we thinking about our growing populace and demographics, and how are we going to mobilize our people? Like, because once we get to where we get on some of these gains we've gotten right now, we're celebrating our Supreme Court gains. And I thought, oh yeah, look at those tweets. Took 5 minutes, right? There's already people planning right now how to pull it all the way back. And so we always have to integrate it in our lives. This is the work, y'all. We're going to be in this family for a long time. So let's just like buckle up and know that, no, you don't get done. We don't just like clean off our hands with hand sanitizer and it's COVID free or whatever they tell us it is, right? Like we are in this together. And so that's why we also just have to have fun with it and like have joy, because this is a lifetime. This is why we're here.
What does Alice Walker say?
Absolutely.
Hard times require furious dancing.
Yes, I love it. Yes.
What about you, Blair? What do you think? How do you
I keep repeating is that we can't, we can't unlive it. Like that's the thing is, people are like, this is going to go back to normal. And I'm like, the things that we've experienced as a people, like what has gone on in the zeitgeist, that can't be like taken away. Now the progress can be turned back, but I always think about reconstruction. And you asked, we want to talk about, 1,500 Black men were appointed to positions in construction, and then Rutherford B. Hayes Thanos that shit away, like he snatched that away just in one fell swoop, even though he was part of the more liberal party. And so we have to look, in the political sense, right? But we also have to think beyond electoral politics. And this is something that, you said it can't happen overnight. Some stuff does. It doesn't mean that like the impetus and the causes and then the result happen overnight, but sweeping changes can happen overnight to our detriment and to our benefit. Like it's about enacting things in the legislature, but really thinking beyond electoral politics. I myself, Jamia and I were both Planned Parenthood alum, and we've done our fair share of like grassroots organizing, etc. I keep telling people I'm retired. I really feel like my duty now is to educate people about how to take things beyond the current moment. For my own sake, police and getting arrested back in 2016, we're still suing the police department of Baton Rouge. There's still an email in my inbox that I have not been able to open and answer, even though it's part of the case, just because it is so much for me. And so like, just to reaffirm that I can't do it anymore in the same way that I want to, I went to the march. My parents, they decided we should. So we went to the march in my neighborhood on the main thoroughfare, a neighborhood that used to be a sundown town that my grandma used to get escorted from the premises of as a Black woman. And there were people, I might get emotional now, but there were white people and like the Asian folks who live here, like, maybe pockets of Black people marching through, just shouting Black Lives Matter. As soon as I came upon this march, I started sobbing like uncontrollably. I was wearing my mask. It's very hard to have an emotional moment in a mask because you will like almost hyperventilate, but they have good ventilation. Anyway, so I was just like, I could not even truly. And like, he was like, a white woman definitely overtook your emotion. Black women could cry too. And so I was like so emotional about it because I would never imagine that would take place. And I think that's what's beautiful and what can sustain us is that there's so much happening right now that we could not have imagined. Like there is an entire department in Minneapolis that doesn't exist anymore, which is turning places of harm into places of love and acceptance. Like stuff is happening that we have not even been able to like conceptualize. The fact that stuff that we're like cool with and we conceptualize, stimulus checks being issued to everyone in the country, not everybody, because undocumented folks still didn't receive, folks who don't have permanent homes or addresses didn't receive. But the fact that that's universal basic income, and people used to like scoff at Andrew Yang when he talked about that, like, what are you even talking about, Andrew? That's impossible, but now it's like, well, actually where are the rest of our checks, so it's this shift in mindset. So I really encourage people to think of this as something that we're helping to birth together. We are in this like laborious process of gestating, I love my metaphors, like infant of freedom, and we have to nourish that and make sure that we're like, going through the birth process of that organically. You can't just, deal with somebody who gets pregnant and then stop thinking about, prenatal care, what your birth plan is going to look at. No, you're hiring a coach. Make sure you do your breathing exercises. I feel like Lori feels like this extra because you're a new mom, but you really have to focus on these things. So you can't just look at something and then turn away. So I've been encouraging folks like, hey, If you're on my page and you're only following me to check a box, toodaloo. I don't have time for you. You know, I did fine without you. I'll continue to be fine with or without you. But what we're not about to do is have people occupy a space and take up space and derail and distract while the opposition is mobilizing, like Jamia said, you know, 4 election years from now. So if I hear another person tell us to vote, and I mean us, because they're not reminding their white folks in rural areas to not be racist when they vote. They're reminding Black people to vote because there's this perception that we don't. So if you're doing that and you're reminding us to vote and you're adding that to your requirements for grant distribution and such, but you're not talking about voter distribution or voter suppression or the distribution of what the you know, gerrymandered districts look like, you're not here for the whole conversation. So you're not going to be the one as a privileged person to suddenly decide and liberate a community. You have to use your privilege to uplift what that community's already been doing so it can be sustainable.
I love that. It's so true. You're right. They're encouraging Black folks like go vote. And the reality is like, we know we are out there voting. Like, did you guys see what happened in Kentucky? Like people were banging down the door. Like they're like, let me in so I can cast my vote. So that is not the issue at all. It's more or less about institutional racism. It's about some systematic race. Like it's just about people not having opportunities, and we know that. We know that's the issue. I think I want to go take this in another direction and talk about publishing. You know, you guys are both, we're all authors, and there is also a movement happening in the publishing industry to really amplify the voices of folks of color and Black writers. Those, yes, show your books.
Your book too.
Books.
We need yours.
Oh my gosh, I don't know where my book is in my house, but yes, buy my book too. But that's the reality. Like this week and last week, the New York Times bestseller list was filled with Black authors. There's a movement happening now, like to black out the list, just continue to amplify the voices of Black people. How do you feel about that as writers? And is this a good thing? I think so. Will it continue? And how can we keep the momentum going?
Yeah, I mean, what I want to see, what I think is important is we need to make sure that this becomes the norm instead of a passing fad. So it's really important that we make sure that, just like we were talking about in terms of, you know, politics and how these things change, and you kind of have to stay woke and make sure that we create systems and institutions that continue to support and foster this work. This is also something that needs to happen in the publishing industry. And I can say that as someone who, you know, is directing a publishing house at Feminist Press, but also an author and a Black author, and having those intersections show up with me in the process every step of the way. So I think that what I want to see is that when that this list, right, what we've seen right now, and then what we saw that happened, I think it was earlier last fall, they were talking about some other records that were happening around Black women as it related to bestseller lists, and not seeing that as the whole victory, right? Like as we were talking about Barack Obama, not having that be our Barack Obama moment, right? But saying that, okay, like it's amazing that we are uplifting these very worthy voices, but imagine if we had a system that did not have the kind of gatekeeping that would have us have an industry that's 80% white, with only 1% Black editors in the whole industry, 1%, and that only 5% of this industry on the publishing professional end writ large is Black, that it makes sense when you think about those numbers, why we see the disparities that we have. And so I'm really interested in what kind of work can happen to change that and transform it, because you did amazing research a few years ago that showed that the person, the demographic most likely to buy a book in either form, e-format or print form, was a college-educated Black woman. So if that is the case, right, and then you have sort of the people who say that racism doesn't exist and say, oh, all markets only drive what gets published, then we would be seeing a whole lot more books targeting us because we fit into that demographic, right? But no, when you look at who makes books from production of all levels, from, you know, who's producing them, who's printing them, who's designing the covers, who's typesetting them, all of that, when we're underrepresented, it shows in it, and it shows in terms of how Black authors are paid. With the Publishing Paid Me hashtag, it shows that, and it shows within the lack of Black authors in the agent sector, or the Black agents in the agent sector as well. And so, get off my soapbox, but I want to just say that it's really important for us all to continue to do this work, and as consumers, show and make an investment in continuing to keep Black books and out there and shared and supported, because I think that there's a lot of work that still needs to be done. And I think that it's really important that we support organizing that's also happening around POC and publishing and allies who are saying we want to do different things. And we also want to acknowledge the history that this industry has had as it relates to racialized capitalism and how we're going to transform things, like the Pub Workers for Justice. So I think that I'm excited. Like you said, I'm cautiously excited about what is happening right now, but I'm also wanting to be mindful of the fact that when I started at Feminist Press, it was the same year that Merriam-Webster Dictionary said that the word of the year was feminism. And so I had some funders and some other folks saying, oh, well, you all don't need our support because feminism's so mainstream now. You had the Women's March, you have dictionary that says feminist is the word of the year. And we were saying, well, feminist was our word of the year 50 years ago, but also it's going to be our word of the year 50 years later, even if this moment passes again and somehow we experience another backlash. And so I think that we need to be prepared for that in publishing too, to remember Coretta Scott King, that the struggle is going to have to be fought and won in every generation.
Absolutely. And I think for myself, like, the publishing conversation, like this whole moment really brought me to like my knees when I did a post on Instagram where I just like laid down, like, you know, people are always like, oh, wow, you should be so proud you're an author. But honestly, I was so resentful of both of my books, and I'm holding them right here. So like buy them and stuff, you know, definitely I mean that. But the amount of pain and like turmoil that I went through of like walking into bookstores that I had previously called, that the, you know, 10 Speed Press team had previously called and said, hey, this is our author, she's coming to sign books, and then getting there and then having them be like, so you wrote this book, you know? And it's like, dude, I'm on the cover of both of my books. That's literally me. This is me. I'm right there, you know? So like, what the heck? And like, I also know that like in creating this stuff, like, and then the illustrations are by Monique Lay and by Rochelle Baker. And just the amount of turmoil that comes with trying to prove yourself constantly and feeling and being made to feel like you're not enough. Because I don't feel like I'm not enough. I know that I've done like dope shit. I know that my accomplishments are great, but it's constantly being made to feel that way and having to do that labor of being like, no, I rock. Like the work that I've done is great. The other thing is, you know, I'm a historian. I'm happy to write about the oppressed peoples in our history, especially from like a familial standpoint, and to humanize that. But not every Black person wants to do that. And I think there needs to be more spaces where, you know, looking at your publishing board, like, are you giving cookbooks to white women? Are you giving like these lifestyle blogging books about, you know, personal life, and then making Black folks write about their most traumatic experience ever to get a check? Like, that's not equitable. That's not fair. So this is two things people that we and looking into. Then it also says to Black folks, your joy isn't worth publishing. Your joy isn't worth, you know, caring about, which we also know not to be true, because, you know, we see it from everywhere to like fiction to nonfiction, history, etc. That when there are stories that are, you know, browner, more diverse, like just look at Spider-Verse, the way that performed, you know, like some of the highest records. And when the, you know, it was first announced that Miles Morales is going to be the feature, people were like, oh, well, that won't perform well. Well, we show up, and not only do we shows up because like fictional identity there, mixed heritage. So it's really, I don't want it to be considered a gamble anymore. And the other thing I see constantly is when it comes to book proposals is that we have to prove our own marketability, but then we aren't always provided the same marketing resources as our more privileged counterparts. So I'm really proud of 10 Speed Press with Penguin Random House in particular, because they have, you know, a meeting with me to start to transform the marketing process, which is great because I can contribute my time. and my privilege as somebody who's been, working with them, but then systematize some of those learnings. I'm also not in a current contract, so that gives me a little bit more range and room. So that's what I would say. I call on people who are very solid right now, be able to, and also to remember that, like, being quiet, just because you've made it to a certain extent doesn't mean it's not going to be snatched away at any moment, because your foundation could be snatched away. So I'm always of the opinion that I'm going to raise as much hell as possible, especially when I get to a new plateau, a certain level of accomplishment, because I don't know how long I will be here. So I might as well not get too comfortable and make sure nobody else is getting too comfortable either. And I found that to be really fulfilling, but also really helpful to the other people. The other thing is, it's going to be a matter of time before people say things like, just like when Steven Spielberg was saying we shouldn't have streaming platforms considered, it's only going to be a matter of time till people say, oh, well, then the New York Times doesn't really matter anymore because you've let all these people in. So it's one of those things where we should cherish and hold on to these things. But I'm one of those people who's very much about creating our own institutions. And that's why I love Well Read Black Girl so much, because it's like, you don't have to wait to get featured. We love you. We support you, period. That's why I love Feminist Press so much, because it's not just looking at people on, on the rainiest day or on the sunniest day. They're looking at you through the storm too. And you two are so responsible with helping me become an author and helping me guide my work. And that's how you do it. We work in family styles. We work in community styles. So if you get your leg in the door, don't think about it as just you winning. Make sure everybody is.
Yeah, it's so true. So that's a good segue into the community that's watching. Hi, everyone. We're going to take some questions. So if you have any questions, put them in the chat box and I will read them. The first one is going to take us back to what we were talking about earlier around police reform and defunding the police. The question is, what do you think about the Democrats standing on police reform legislation rather than accepting GOP crumbs? So I think they want to know, like, are they going to reform, or do we completely abolish the system? What do you ladies think?
I think shoot for the moon. Honestly, we're in a moment that is incredible. And one of the things that I think has been a detriment to the Democratic Party, and if we really look at the history of the Democratic Party, banking on amazing people like Barbara Jordan, who was a Black lesbian, and on a technicality, the first Black woman governor in the United States for a couple days. But the fact is, anytime we shy away and we do things that are like, oh, well, let's compromise, that doesn't even make sense from a business standpoint. If you make an offer, say I want to get $10,000 from you and I start at $8,000, that makes no sense, So why would you start with, we want to make our community safer, and start making concessions immediately? We need the Democrats to not be, actually, we need all politicians to not be so careerist. We need them to understand that in the conversation of privilege and putting your life on the line, if you're thinking more about whether or not you're going to get elected next season, and thinking about more who are my funders going to be, and then you're ignoring phenomenons like AOC and how AOC just won in a landslide again, like, understand the fact that the people will have your back when you do what the people want. And the people want to get rid of this system that we currently have in policing, because it has been a historic organization of Black pain and Black death. We can't get away from that. And, slapping a new sticker on it isn't going to change it. And we have evidence to demonstrate this. So it's time to listen to what's happening, get uncomfortable, and put your, if even it's your career on the line, because we will replace you.
Say that again. The next question is a little bit lighter. Jamia, do you want to add to the police reform question?
No, I mean, I think everything Blair said sounds right on. And I was thinking too about, Jamal Bowman in New York too. He's a middle school principal, and he was unseating an incumbent, Elliot Engel, and did it in the AOC way, right? Of like people powered, shoe to the ground, grassroots progressive strategy. And so I do think that we are having a reckoning all the way around right now, right? Like in the world and the planet, in our systems and our parties. And it will be at our peril if we don't listen. People are showing us and telling us that they want to change and they want to reimagine the future and do things differently. And what we've seen happening in Minnesota, all of that is really exciting. One thing that I have really thought about too in this country, which I know makes a lot of people shudder including myself, given the situation we're in and how it's so dire, we kind of get forced into thinking only in binaries, right? And that's always dangerous when we get forced into thinking only in binaries. But countries like Portugal, they came together and had a lot of the different parties who were saying, hey, usually we disagree on a great many things, but we know that our very far right opposition is dangerous. And so we're going to come together, figure out how to win this thing. And then when we win it, we are going to figure out how we apportion who does what. And not to say that their structure is perfect, but I just love that and want that for us. It's kind of like how AOC has said to certain Democrats that in other countries, they would be in a totally different party, right? That here it's a completely different framework, but we need to be able to have new ideas. We shouldn't see those new ideas as threatening. We should see them as expanding and bringing more people in as a bridge. So I think that we also need new education around these frames. And I think that a lot of people, when they hear defund police and when they hear abolition, they don't know what it really means. And so I think that it's really important for us to do the work of kind of not condescending, because I believe in the intelligence of the people always, but just really kind of undoing false and leading frames that have made people really misunderstand what it means, which is what it really means is about a redistribution of resources so that communities have what they need to thrive. And I think it's important for us to have that conversation in our communities as well. It's kind of like just all the myth busting, from that to busting the myth that talking about race is racist, right? Like that's a myth, and yet it's something that's so prevalent.
We have a really great question. It says, to all you awesome women, when are you running for elected office? And I see Blair said you might run for the school board.
Yeah, I'm very retired, but one thing I could do, and I think in my context is, the publishers like McGraw-Hill are being extremely unscrupulous with our young people's lives. And we all had McGraw-Hill textbooks, odds are they are a powerhouse. And I don't know what they've been contributing to this conversation presently. I'd love to see if they did one of those little black square moments. But we need a history that doesn't focus on the minutia of white men and their victories, while ignoring their atrocities, while pretending that people of color and Black people and oppressed people, in particular Indigenous people, are responsible for our own oppression, because that's ahistorical and it has consequences. So it's not just about teaching to the test. It's not just about stressing kids out with school and standardized tests. It's really about materially shifting the way that we're forming these young people's lives. And I could talk about that forever. So I think school board would be a place where I'm very, where I'd be able to make those changes. But I'm also really excited because the state of California has a Black man presently. His name escapes me, but you can look him up, and he's already moving forward with anti-racism trainings in
Can you say his name again?
School districts that have been historically it. And so I forgot his name, that's the thing, but he's a state superintendent of California. He's new, and he's absolutely amazing. But it's great to see that folks are already thinking about how we can transform schools in meaningful ways. But the other thing is, we don't have to change the world just from elected office.
What about you, Jamia? Are you running anytime soon?
Oh, yeah, we got his name. His name's Tony Thurman. Thank you so much, Heather. Tony Thurman.
I love this. I love that just like happened like that too. Teamwork makes the dream work. Yeah, it's funny. It's a question I get asked a lot. And I am ashamed to say maybe about 15 years ago, one of my former bosses in Shiro's, Gloria Felt, asked me about it for a book she was writing about power and women in power. And at the time I said, oh, I don't see myself doing that. I'll probably support other people's campaigns because I have student loans, I have debt, so I can't get elected because I wouldn't, that I didn't
Not true.
Power to do that. But Stacey Abrams changed the conversation for me and showed me that, hey, the fact that I have student debt, the fact that I have used my resources to help other family members, and, that's impacted my finances. I've had to have like a tax plan before I've had to have myself a payment plan, right? All those things that they tried to use to shame her when she was running, before they were about to drop the shame, she dropped the op-ed saying, yeah, those things are true about me. And those things are the things that make it so that I understand the people, what they need, and how to create just policies to create economic justice for the people.
Right.
So that Abrams moment was a real moment for me to say, hey, every time I've been asked if I would ever run, because I had this shame about economic injustice and how it was showing up in my own life, and feeling shame that, somehow I was just doing the best that I could to make it, and was feeling judged by the society about having to take student debt before I understood, no, I inherited a broken system. Right. Makes me say that, yes, right now, if I saw the right role for which I was the person who I thought could best serve and best be a leader for the people and be the voice that could help get the people where they needed to go, yes. And I think for me, if there was a position that I would ever run for, and I think the person who's in this position now is great, so I'm not saying that I'm coming for it at all, is public advocate of New York City. That's a secret dream job, not so secret that one day.
I can totally see you doing that. Oh my goodness, I totally could see that. That's amazing.
I think I'd love it, right? I mean, what better job than to be, and maybe because I'm a Libra that I'm saying, like, what better job than to be like the justice watchdog for the people and to be the megaphone for what the people need. I would love to have that honor someday.
Oh, that's amazing.
Let me know. I'll run your communications department.
Thank you. I'm already on I'm going to write you a check tonight for your school board campaign. Just let me know.
Watch out, Tony. We're going to switch gears a little bit. So Blair and I are in LA. So this is a very LA question. Have you all considered turning your work or books into TV, digital video projects?
Yeah, hit me up, honestly. Like with Making Our Way Home, it's a 7-chapter book that could be a 7-part miniseries on the Great Migration. I already have casting in mind for sure. I mean, being from LA, I'm constantly thinking about I'm from LA. I had an agent when I was like 7 years old because I wanted one. So we got headshots done and everything. I post them occasionally. But I'm always thinking about things in a cinematic sense and how the camera is, as my partner recently said, also a performer, and how that changes the stage and how that changes what the audience does, and how much, things like 13th documentary, people are always pointing to that as something that really inspires people to take action, because it talks about something that for a long time, I think, has been trapped in an academic space, and bring it more accessible, but also capture interest in a way that really transforms. So I'm always thinking about that. Sometimes I even write it to that space. But the thing is, we also have to consider like casting and things, I think about Angie Thomas with The Hate U Give, and how there was such a cacophony of noise around the casting decisions, and how she spoke on how she didn't have a lot of agency there, but she was ultimately very pleased with the final product of the film. So I think that that's something that's also exciting. But I don't want to see, I talk about Ken Burns in my book. Like, he's somebody who has contributed to the erasure of Black people. He's a great filmmaker, super American icon, amazing. Did a great job in talking about Vietnam and making sure Black soldiers were included in that conversation. Right. But at a time when 70% of farm workers were Black, not nary a Black person appears in the Dust Bowl documentaries, So I want to see the same energy that is given to people like Ken Burns, like Howard Zinn in the historian context, like all of the American picker shows that History Channel has, and start to promote. And I'm happy to be the one to volunteer, young historians, media savvy historians who have been doing this work, because, I'm glad Henry Louis Gates has his own show. That's crucial. But he's constantly referred to as one of the only, and we can't have people archetyping or typecasting us in who gets to tell what stories.
Yes, and I'm so glad you mentioned that documentary, because I have seen it multiple times. My husband's a jazz musician, and I have same thoughts about that as well. And what does it mean for a filmmaker to make art about a specific community that they're not a part of, and what kinds of accountability is related to that in terms of how you build that film, how you do the work in front and behind the camera. But yes, I am really interested in TV and film, and want to expand my engagement with it. It's another part of media that I'm learning more about too, in terms of how we need to be represented. And I remember when I first started out doing the media activism work, I think the percentage rate was 1% of cinematographers were Black women. And so I don't know what the exact numbers are in 2020, but it wasn't that long ago. So I'm definitely interested in, and I want to also see more of our books adopted for dramatic rights as well, and think that that's really important.
That's awesome. Is there anything that you both would like to share that we haven't discussed around Black activism, around your books? Anything you want to tell the audience before we close up?
Well, one thing I would like to tell everyone, since you've been so wonderful asking questions about Blair and I and our books, is that, as Blair was saying, Well Read Black Girl has been such an amazing community in our lives. It was a dream come true. And, you know, you really walk the walk and walk the talk about what Well Read Black Girl is. And the book is really beautiful. Had the honor of contributing to that book. And we mentioned my mom tonight, but I was looking through my pictures the other night of like the last months of her life. And one of the last books she read was that anthology. And so I have a picture of her in the hospital bed reading Well Read Black Girl. And so I just want to mention your book and mention that Well Read Black Girl is a movement. And before we had this major uprising in the moment that we're having right now, I remember kind of being in awe of how many non-Black folks attended Well Read Black Girl.
Mm-hmm.
And it was so interesting to me because it was kind of curious, because I kept thinking, I'm like, oh, what are they thinking at this part that I consider the benediction, the invocation of this Black bookish girl church that is happening right now, where we're all levitating, hugging on each other, supporting each other's books, like embodying the practice. And literally I felt like Octavia and all of our mothers were in the room, like 4 mothers, like just there kind of holding space. But I just want to say that that is activism. Like the work you have done at Well Read Black Girl is alchemy. It is transforming hearts and minds through the pages of books, and you're bringing people together who would otherwise not be together having these conversations. And you're also help make those of us who often feel so isolated feel seen. So I just want to take a moment to reflect back to you what Well Read Black Girl means to me, to the point where I'll just tell you, like, I wear the heck out of that Well Read Black Girl shirt. It's amazing. You should buy one from Glory's site. But I've worn it in Europe and had people like come to me and like say to me in French, like, Well Read Black Girl shirt, how can I get it? Like, not Well Read Black Girl saying this to me, like French dudes. And it's amazing because I think people really understand the power of that statement and what it means for us to claim that, to claim who we are. So I just want to thank you, because I think that like your Black literary activism is amazing. And what I hope happens when we're in the next realm and like, you know, just like watching what's happening down here, that I'm hoping that what they're studying in their history books will be the literary renaissance that happened right now. And I think that Well Read Black Girl is going to be a part of that all the people on the bestsellers list and those who aren't, and the people on this call, like I liken this to a renaissance that I think is going to be really important. So thank you for the gifts that you give us all the time. And you're a prime example of how activism can take so many different forms.
Oh my
Absolutely.
goodness. Yeah, you're going to make me cry. Stop it.
I think what I want to say just real quick is that, you know, we don't get to, I've said this before, but we don't get to decide, we as in the Black folks, oppressed peoples, Indigenous folks who've been doing this work, we don't get to decide if y'all continue to care or not. We don't get to decide if y'all in 6 months are doing this work, because we've been out here. We know, we've lived this. We've had to teach ourselves and how to do this unlearning and how to do this hard work. And that it is a privilege to be able to be doing the thing that makes you uncomfortable, being unlearning this work, while, you know, being uncomfortable for us is, you know, having a police car pull up behind us, or being afraid that we're going to be seen as somebody who's thieving a store instead of, you know, shopping there while we're wearing our mask. So, you know, it is crucial to participate in this moment, but you decide whether or not it's a movement, and you decide whether or not you let us down. And that sounds very grave and very heavy, but it is. And so that's just something I really have been leaving folks with, because it is a moment of introspection. It is a moment of deciding that, you know, history is knocking on your door. Are you going to answer it? Because whether or not you do answer it, whether or not you say, yes, I'll be part of this, you will be recorded, and you might be recorded as a non-participant. And we never like hearing about those in history.
Right.
Yeah.
It's true. I am so in awe of both of you. You're so tremendous and talented and have so much to offer in terms of your resources, in terms of your work. I'm going to tell everyone again, go out, purchase their books. You will learn so much. You go to their Patreon, support Feminist Press. There you go, Blair. Share your books, Jamia. Perfect.
Shout out to Elisa and Carolyn, my co-authors who are amazing.
Amazing.
And I want to shout out Rochelle Baker, who did these amazing illustrations, which appeared throughout the text. Want to shout out my Uncle Lester. This is a gay couple appearing on this book. For some reason, people think this is the gayer book. They're both very gay. But I want to shout out Monique Lay, who did these illustrations as well.
Amazing.
And I also just want to say what I love about these covers, because I just feel like I'd never have gotten to say this to Blair, and when you stayed with me. So Blair also came here and made my apartment look so much better than what it looks like on Instagram. I was amazed. But Blair, I love how you have yourself in your covers, because it's like such a Spike Lee moment, but like in the best feminist intersectional way. And I just want to just shout that out, because I'm in awe and love that. I'm like, yes, you are creating the art in the container and you're putting yourself into the act of history, which is beautiful.
Yeah, that's the thing. I think that's the difference between a lot of like Black historians and like white historians, is that we don't get to decide whether or not we participated. We don't get to be like, nobody's really coming to Black folks to be like, hey, can you do a story about like the Hasidic Jewish folks, even though you're not part of that community? Not to say there aren't Black Hasidic Jews, because that's not true, that's erasure. But the thing is, like, Ken Burns gets to decide, oh, I'm going to document this group and then I don't have to participate in them. We don't get that luxury. So, shout out to Oprah for being the reason I decided to put myself on my own cover like she does.
Love it.
Oh yeah, Oprah's the queen of every cover of O Magazine. She sets the precedent. Yeah, and she does deserve. She does. Thank you again. Thank you both. This has been a great Big Ideas Night. Thank you everyone for tuning in, for sending your questions. We appreciate you. That's all, folks.
Toodaloo.